C with Leon Delaney here until 6. It's about 25 to 5 now, and between now and 5 o'clock we'll be talking finance, starting as of right now with Luke Smith from Envision Financial. Good afternoon. I did it again. I pushed the wrong button because it's the opposite way around from the old desk I used to use, but there you go.
That's all right. Well, I'll keep it between me, you and the people you're going to tell.
Exactly right, which is, half a dozen or so. Half a dozen thousand, I mean. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Luke, Envision Financial, and of course, as always, if people have a question, all you need to do is give us a call, 6255 1206, or you can text in your question, 0488 266 266. You can even email the question, studio@2cc.net.au. Today, we're looking at something called reversionary pensions, and my very first question today, before we even started on air, was this: what is a reversionary pension? So let's start there. What is it, and when do we need it?
That's it, the $60 million question. Well, a reversionary pension is simply an income stream that you take out of superannuation that you want to pass to somebody else in the unlikely event of your death.
What do you mean unlikely?
Well,
we're all going to die.
True.
I think we've heard this story before, haven't we?
Hopefully we don't know when that's going to get us.
No.
It's really there to say that if we break down how superannuation works, we spend the vast majority of our working life accumulating money in super because it's obviously a tax efficient structure. And then from the point that we say, okay, we don't want to put any more money in, we'd now like to take some money out.
Yeah.
We convert the accumulation account of super to a pension account. Now, the mechanics of that are really quite simple because it doesn't affect the underlying assets or anything that you hold. It is just the tax treatment of the money that you've accumulated. So if we take a step back and talk about superannuation, we pay 15% tax on earnings inside super. All funds do that. And when we start an income stream, where we have what we call an account-based pension, we don't pay any tax on the earnings inside that pension structure. So they're very, very tax advantageous. And then we have a reversionary nomination when we start the pension to say, in the event that I died, my pension would continue to my spouse. And she can keep that money in the superannuation environment and avoid having to pay out the money from the pension account and have that money leave the superannuation environment, which is what happens when you have a death benefit payment.
So this is a much simpler way of managing that process, and certainly a lot more efficient than leaving all my worldly goods to my significant other in my will type arrangement.
Well, exactly, and we spoke on one of the shows a couple of weeks ago about binding nominations and wills and all of the estate planning documentation that you have. This is effectively a really good way of passing money in the superannuation environment to a spouse because your will, as you know it, that has no legal power over the assets of a super fund.
Okay, so in that sense, it's very similar to the way you own your home as joint tenants, where it doesn't have to be left behind in your will because the other joint tenant just automatically acquires ownership in the event of your death. So it's very similar to that.
Yeah, look, spot on. That's a really, really good analogy to use, and it's a really good way of passing wealth. And with all of the recent changes in the legislation in relation to super thresholds, account-based limits, and all of the other measures that you have in relation to transfer balance caps and the maximum amount of money that you can keep in super, a reversionary pension is a very good way of ensuring continuity for a loved one, but also to benefit from the continuity of the tax efficiency available from a pension structure, but then also thinking about how money goes into the superannuation environment. We've seen a number of the contribution thresholds reduced in previous years where at the moment as it stands, you can make a non-concessional contribution, which means you do not claim a tax deduction of up to $100,000 per year or $300,000 in one go over a rolling 3-year period. Yep. So a reversionary pension is a very good way of thinking about your broader asset base in the superannuation environment and saying, well, if I died and my pension wasn't reversionary, the money would be paid out. Could my spouse or significant other then be able to get that same amount of money back into the superannuation environment and continue to benefit from the tax efficiency of that structure? So it has a lot to do with the value of the account that you're dealing with. Yep. People also need to have a good think about the transfer balance cap limits because, as we know from the change in legislation, $1.6 million is the most that one individual can have in the superannuation environment and maintain a tax-free pension. So if you're going to inherit or be the reversionary individual of a pension and you have your own account, there's some significant planning associated with making sure you're under those relevant thresholds so that you can maintain the efficiency of the income stream that you receive. So
it's never simple, is it?
look, the government calls it simple super.
Yeah, well,
I'd love to meet him one day, but it's getting more and more complicated the more they make the changes.
when you are choosing a superannuation fund in the first place, there are so many different factors to consider, and there are so many different funds to choose from.
Correct.
Once you've had your fund, you're at the point of retirement, and you're looking at this reversionary pensions arrangement. Now, this might be a silly question because I know nothing about it, but are there options available where you can decide different features to your reversionary pension, or is it just is what it is?
Yeah, basically it is what it is. The important thing there is obviously to understand the fund that you're in, and potentially if you have a self-managed super fund, what your deed says, because your deed is your guideline, it's your legal obligation to say, in the event of A, B and C, this is what our documentation says will happen. So generally all funds will provide a reversionary pension option. It's not mandatory, but again, it's part of a broader planning decision to say, okay, I've got my will for my assets outside of super, and then from a transfer standpoint, a reversionary pension is one way of passing monies. You could obviously pay the money out of the superannuation environment. You could, in some instances, have a super fund where you have both.
Okay.
So you could have a pension account inside a self-managed super fund, as well as an accumulation account inside a self-managed super fund.
Oh, you're just confusing me.
One part's reversionary, one part's a death benefit. The important thing to take from this is make sure you understand what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, we started this talking about a situation where we're dealing with a husband and wife situation. So the money reverts to the spouse, the surviving spouse. But does it have to be your spouse? Could you set up somebody else to be the beneficiary of a reversionary pension? And if you can, or I don't know, maybe I'm going too far here, can you?
No.
Okay, so it's not a question then. So it only applies in a spousal situation.
Correct, because the majority of the rest of the legislation goes on to say that death benefits need to be paid and be cashed out of the superannuation environment. So we then start to get into estate planning law.
Yeah.
So it's very important that when you're working with your family solicitor about your enduring powers of attorney, your binding nominations and your reversionary nominations, where people are the trustee of their own funds, it's very important to get specific advice in relation to, well, what would happen? Because the biggest change we've seen in the reversionary pension environment is the introduction of the transfer balance cap, which is the maximum amount of money that you can keep in super, because it's then pushing people over that threshold because of what they're receiving. Okay. And especially for people in the ACT, it's very significant because CSS, PSS, DFRDB and MSBS being the defined benefit schemes issued by the government, they have an assessment against that transfer balance cap. So whilst we talk pension, this is the similar sort of thing for those funds because they revert at a rate of 67%, although they are a very different animal. So it's very important that you understand the broader context of what would happen in the event of a death.
All right. I think I still have questions. What would happen, for example, if your spouse is significantly younger and therefore not of an age that would normally be collecting a pension from a superannuation fund?
Great question. That is also okay because it would be treated as a death benefit pension because the person in receipt of the original pension is of preservation age. So a younger spouse could receive that pension on a tax-free basis for the remainder of their life, provided the money didn't run out, and benefit from those tax concessions that the original purchaser of the pension benefited from. So they wouldn't lose anything because it's the status of the individual that started the pension that passes to a younger spouse member. Okay,
so age is no barrier?
Not really, no.
Okay.
No.
And I assume, it should go without saying, but I'll just check to be sure, spouse includes de facto couples, same-sex couples, every kind of couple?
Yep, that's right. If you're living in a domiciled relationship that would be deemed a marriage for all intensive purposes, the legislation, a lot of the funds, rules and laws now are adapting to a changing environment and making sure that everybody's included and that nobody's been left out in relation to
You
that
don't
sort of
have to
assessment.
provide any documentation to prove a relationship? I mean, a
Well,
marriage certificate is easy to show, but other forms of relationship, it's not so easy, is it?
No, it's not. And I think at the end of the day, I've always had the basis there that if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, and it's beyond a reasonable doubt that you're not trying to do something that isn't in the faith of the law, then I think you have every right to be entitled to those sorts of entitlements.
Every time I hear that analogy about if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I'm reminded of Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, the Premier of Queensland way back, who obviously is no longer with us, but I do remember on one occasion he said something along the lines of, if it looks like a duck and if it quacks like a duck, then you shoot it like a crow.
Well, whatever gets the job done.
It's about 14 to 5. We're talking finance with Luke Smith from Envision Financial, and we'll be back very shortly with more. News coming up at 5. Of course, we're talking finance with Luke Smith from Envision Financial, and today we've been discussing reversionary pensions, which quite simply means after you die, it reverts to your loved ones.
Spot on.
Specifically your spouse of an official or de facto nature.
Exactly right.
There we go. So what should people be considering when thinking about a reversionary pension and deciding whether or not it's right for them?
Yeah, look, I think some of the key things that people need to remember are obviously how you draw an income stream is tied to the other broader income sources that you have. So think about how it fits into your other broader strategies and structures in relation to assets in your own name, assets in a family trust, and the mix of assets that you use to fund your lifestyle, or if you are going to work. They should have a think about where they want and how they want the money to be paid, because if you have specific assets that you really like and you want them to pass to your spouse, then obviously a reversionary pension is a good way of ensuring that nothing is sold down. So there's continuity of asset, which is really important when you're thinking about the income stream, the use of franking credits and all these other internal strategies that you have within a superannuation structure. So I think that's really important. Make sure it ties in with your broader estate planning as well, because if you've got wills and enduring powers of attorney and different things that can be controlled and actioned, you want to make sure that if the end game is to get it to person A, make sure that you have all of that in place. So if you do move funds, and a lot of people roll over funds now, I read a stat yesterday that 87% of Australians would change their superannuation provider because the fund didn't have their same ethical values.
Well, that's a reasonable excuse, I think.
Yeah, I look for sure, and I think more and more people are becoming cognizant of sustainable investment, ethical investment and things of that nature. So people need to keep in mind that if you do change funds, you need to make a new reversionary nomination. It's not a default option within a number of different funds. So depending on which fund you're in and the provider that you're using, make sure you understand how they operate and you have their paperwork down pat. And be sharp with your paperwork, because this is one of those areas where the devil is in the detail. If you have a self-managed superannuation fund, make sure you've read the deed and you understand whether bonding nominations, reversionary pensions and all of the other options in relation to the components that you maintain are achieving what you want. Because the assumption that you have it because everyone else has it generally means it unravels in your lap, because you may not have actually done something that's in your best interests, and you may actually have not even realised about it. So if you change funds, make sure that the new provider has that paperwork and it's documented. If you have a significant asset base inside of superannuation, think about the transfer balance cap issues. So what I mean there is, if you're going to be the reversionary pension of your spouse's income stream and you already have a significant asset base, you need to plan ahead and think about the transfer balance cap implications, because what that will mean is a large portion of what is currently tax-free may cease to have the same tax efficiency. That way you may want to look at things like using a family trust or using investments in another person's name, where you can maximise marginal tax rates, personal income thresholds and other distribution points to try and maintain the continuity of your broader asset base in line with your retirement and lifestyle objectives. Because there are many different ways to fund lifestyle. Some people use houses, some people use buildings, some people use pensions, some people have a pension from the government after 30 or 40 years of service. A reversionary pension is just one part of the puzzle, so it's important to take into account your broader asset base and where your income is coming from, because there could be a change in the tax implications that you need to keep in mind. And also then make sure that you have assets in your pension account that are maximising and utilising things like franking credits, because if you're maintaining a tax-free pension that will pass to a spouse, you want to be able to utilise and maximise the use of franking credits, because they've been extremely topical. If we look at the outcomes of the last election, whilst it wasn't won and lost on that, it was something that I was dealing with every day leading into it, because it was going to implicate.
I think it was one of the biggest factors.
Yeah, look, and we said on the show many times leading into it, I thought it was completely un-Australian to turn around and try and take that off people that have worked hard their entire life to fund themselves.
Effectively, it was an attempt to change the rules after the game was over.
Exactly.
And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and that was that's been my view, and I've got the Kleenex boxes in my office to prove it. So there's some of the things. I think it's to look at this in isolation is a little dangerous, but just make sure you understand what you want to achieve. Look at your broader estate planning objectives. Read the deed if you've got a self-managed super fund, and make sure your paperwork is accurate and clear. Because if you're not here to discuss what you tried to achieve, it's going to be very difficult to get it done.
Well, that's right, yeah.
So, I've always...
Same thing if doing your will. You want to make sure you're clear.
Correct, exactly. Read the deed, read the deed, read the deed. And make sure that you understand the broader implications of what's going on. And if you're not sure, get some help, because this is extremely complicated, and it's something that you don't want to take the chance, because in every likelihood you spend your entire life saving up that money to do the things you want to do, and you want to ensure that it passes on at the most tax efficient way possible. So
absolutely. Speaking of getting some help, apparently you're looking for some.
Yeah, look, we are. That's a very, very good point. For all the daughters, granddaughters, the nanas, the mums, the dads, and just about anyone else that knows somebody out there that's looking to come and join our team, we're looking for somebody to provide an administration function and work with Sally and Barbara, because service for us is obviously the most important part of what we do, and we'd love to have somebody join the team and help the girls out. So if there's anybody out there that knows somebody that's looking for a fairly relaxed environment to come and work hard in, they can shoot emails through to luke@envisionfinancial.com.au, or they can ring the office and speak with Barb and Sally, 02-6260-4749. If you want to put your hat in the ring, we'd love to have the application and try and find the best person we can to fill the role.
So that's your position vacant, Ad. I assume the same phone number applies for people who would just like to know more about what we've been talking about today, or indeed any other financial advice.
Look, exactly. 6260-4749 is obviously the office number. You can also go to the website, www.envisionfinancial, that's envision with an e.com.au, and access the Knowledge Centre. There's free access there for anybody that wants to delve into the technicalities of anything we've spoken about today, and they can join the Knowledge Centre. We have a whole load of video and written material that you can spend your weekends pouring through, if you're of that ilk.
I believe people do.
Exactly.
I believe people do.
We've got the podcast, the Strategy Stacker, Luke Talks Money on iTunes, and obviously the YouTube channel, Envision Financial Canberra. So you can subscribe to that, and then you'll get each week's show and update what we're talking about and get the key takeouts each week. So
fantastic. Well, thanks for dropping in today, and we'll look forward to catching you again next week.
Go Raiders.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Go Raiders. Luke Smith from Envision Financial, and we'll have more financial talk at the same time next Friday.